Welcome Redemption Church to our online service tonight. I'm really thankful that you're joining us today. Hey, if this is your first time, I just want to say a special welcome to you. We've got a gift for you. We actually have a gift card to Chick-fil-A. We'd love to send to you, so just drop a comment, and say that you're new, or email hello@redemptionroanoke.com so that we can send that to you right to your door. We'd love to just say thank you for joining us. We know there's a ton of things you could be doing on a Sunday evening. You're getting ready for the rest of the week and all of that, but we're thankful that you're worshiping with us. And hey, we're coming to the close of a sermon series tonight, so we're at the end of our 10 Commandments series called Foundation. You know, we've seen that the law is a perfect standard for us to follow, yet, man, there's so much more than simply rules. You know, they include our conduct for sure, what we do, but they also involve what's going on in our heart. They're like a mirror, you know. You look at them and they show us how dirty and ugly that we are. We see that our hearts are never prone to do good things. So the rules themselves aren't what give us life. They're not even what can change us. So they're not the thermostat that turns up the heat in our heart. They're really more like the thermometer that shows us how sick we really are. Because as Paul tells us, we're always, for no apparent good reason, prone to rebel against God and His good rules for us. So we have a heart problem. It doesn't want to listen to God. So these commandments have shown us what our human heart looks like with all of its flaws, all of its imperfections, and all of that. So just to review what we've seen these 10 commandments do for us, we want to be our own God rather than worship God as the one true God. That's the first commandment, right? The second commandment has shown us we want to make God into our image rather than admit that we're made in His. We want to make our name famous instead of His in our lives. We think God and the world is contingent on us and not the other way around. So we refuse to rest, or if we start to get into the next one, we don't want earthly authority over us, so we don't honor our parents or any other authority in our life. We'd rather be our own authority. Or we want sex the way that we want it, however, with whoever, whenever, instead of the context with which God has designed it in marriage. Or we want to take what's not ours, so we cheat and steal to get it, which we're going to talk a little bit more about tonight. Or we'll bend and we'll twist the truth to get what we want, and to lie and to manipulate, to keep our idols safe. And really what it all boils down to is the 10th commandment, which we're going to spend most of our time on this evening. And this is what sums it up for us. What are the true desires of your heart? That's the question that we're going to ask here with this. So if you're taking notes, I know this might throw you off. If you're type A and you like to take things down like I do, you need to have everything in line. But I want to summarize both the 8th and the 10th commandment together in this one phrase. So if that throws you off, I'm sorry. But this is what it is, okay? Here it is. Desire to give. That's what we're going to see tonight. These commandments really push us to see that we need a desire to give rather than a desire to take. That's the principle underneath of these today. And we're also going to see that the only way that we can have the power to desire to give, really the desire to do anything good in our life, is to desire Jesus above everything else. So if you're taking notes, I want to give you the main point as well. The main point of the sermon today is crave to know Jesus above all else. That's the only way we can have the power to do anything good, but especially to desire to give. The 10th commandment really sums up all of the commandments for us. The fundamental question it compels us to ask is, what do I want? What do I crave? What do I desire? Do I desire to give my life to God and to give generously to my neighbors, or do I desire things for myself? Now, I don't want to neglect the 8th commandment, but I do want to spend most of our time looking at the 10th because it does sum up all of the other commandments. So I think that is where our money is well spent here, if I could say it like that. But let's go ahead and read the rest of these together, the rest of these verses in the 10 Commandments together, starting at verse 15, and that's going to finish out our series. All right, here we go. Exodus chapter 20, verse 15 says, "You shall not steal." Then we're going to jump to 17, which says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house, You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. That's our text for tonight. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but the 10th commandment kind of goes back through all of the rest of the commandments that we've called horizontal commandments. Remember that? The vertical have to do with us and authority over us. So that's the first 5 commandments. The first 4 being God is our authority. The 5th one being parents, government, whatever else it is, earthly authority over us. So that's the first 5, vertical. The second 5, 6 through 10, are horizontal. They have to do with how we interact with our neighbors or our peers. So those are our neighbor-oriented commands. And really, the 10th commandment sums all of those up into one in some way. It kind of sums all 10, but it also specifically talks about how we interact with our neighbors. And what's interesting is it deals not just with our conduct or what we do, but it's also a commandment, really the only commandment in the entire 10 that pinpoints the state of our heart. So if you're wondering why we look at not just the conduct, but also the heart behind every single one of the other commandments, it's because of this commandment right here. This commandment's the key to understanding all the rest. You know, you always have to read things in context in the Bible. That means you have to see the whole picture that's going on. So we don't want to just take one bite at a time and think, okay, we can interpret here, we can interpret here, we can understand this. No, it's all together. So we understand that when the commands are given in a conduct-focused kind of way, that's true, that's right, do this, don't do that. But then at the end, it sums it all back up. That means, man, our heart is the biggest issue among all of these things. And that's why Jesus focuses in on the heart in the New Testament, for sure. So this heart-focused commandment informs us that God cares about what we desire. Not just what we do, although what we do is important, but also what we want, what we crave, what we think we need. We have to read that back into all the other commandments so that we understand the 10 commandments well. Now, as we look at the 10th commandment specifically, the word that's used here for covet is a desire for all things that we ought not desire. Namely, because they're not ours, right? They're our neighbors. So we shouldn't desire those things. That's coveting. That's what that means. Another way to say the same Hebrew word that's translated here as covet, that's also translated throughout the rest of the Bible, they'll translate it as covet in some places. They'll translate it as lust in other places. So what do you normally think of when I say lust? We think of sex, right? That's normally what we think of, but really that's just a shallow kind of version of understanding what that word actually means, because lust isn't simply an all-consuming craving for sex. It's an all-consuming craving for anything in our lives. See, desire is not really a bad thing. We're all created to desire things, but when it's twisted into an all-consuming craving for something that's not God, right? Lust, that's what that is. Then our desires will become deadly, and they'll really become devastating for us in the end. This is what happened in the Garden of Eden with Eve, right? The tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eve was tempted by the serpent, and it was a delight to the eyes when she saw the fruit, and she desired it, she coveted it, she lusted after it, because she saw it was good to make one wise. So she took the fruit, and she ate it. It's the same word there in Hebrew that's in the 10th commandment. Covet, lust, crave in a wrong way. She desired something that she ought not to have. And that led to disaster. And that's why the 10th commandment is really a retelling of the first commandment in some ways, because it's calling out idolatry in our heart. You know, you remember what an idol is from the very first sermon in the sermon series, right? We define an idol as anything that we try to substitute for the one true God. Well, coveting or lusting or craving something more than God, it's idolatry. Yeah? Paul says coveting is idolatry in a couple of places in the New Testament. In Ephesians, he writes, "You can be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God." He says that. And then in Colossians, he also says, "Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry." So coveting is evil desire. It's idolatry, because you want something in this world in the wrong way, for the wrong reasons, and you want it more than anything else, including intimacy with God. That's coveting. All right? Now, the opposite of coveting is contentment. And really, It's contentment in God. So you can write that down if you're taking notes. The opposite of coveting is contentment in God because you trust God. You trust Him for everything in your life. His presence and His love is all that you crave. It's all that you want. You don't need anything else to be content because you have Him. You're satisfied in Him. Man, that's what Christian maturity actually looks like. That's what it looks like to walk with Jesus and to grow in your faith. The life of a Jesus follower is constantly learning how to be more and more content in knowing God through Jesus. But see, I think people get confused here about what Christian contentment actually is, because oftentimes, especially in our context in the United States, contentment is seen as a bad thing. And I had a professor my first year in architecture who pushed me on my proclivity to settle on things, really. He felt like I got content a little too easy. And I remember one particular project that I had done, and I'd finished early. I finished before other people. And he said, "Hey, Carter, are you sure that you're done with this project?" And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, man, I feel pretty satisfied with this thing. I feel pretty content about it. I think it's gone well. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm done with it. And he said, I'll never forget what he said. He looked straight at me with a straight face and said, "Carter, do you like Big Macs?" I'm like, what are you talking about? Do I like Big Macs? I'm like, actually, no, I don't like Big Macs, but what's your point? He's like, no. Why are you settling on something when it could be better? See, his point, he might have been being a smart aleck for sure, no doubt. Although, truth be told, he was actually one of my favorite professors in my entire time in architecture. I think it's probably because maybe I'm maybe a little like him. I'm not sure. I've heard it called prickly before, perhaps. But anyway, I got his point. And his point was, why settle for something like McDonald's when you could have Ruth's Chris? If you just push for it and you strive for it and you strive for excellence. Don't be content with what you have, right? And I think that's a valid point. That's not what's going on here, though. Because I think we should not be content with things in this world, right? We should always strive for more. We should look for excellence, and we should look for ways of doing things that are better and better, because that's just being a good steward of God's creation. We want to constantly create and do things well. God's done it with infinite excellence. We want to try to match that at least at our level, right? And so that's not a bad thing. But what ends up happening is we put that definition of contentment on the things that God's talking about here, and contentment with Him. And that's not comparing apples to apples. See, no earthly thing can ever make us content. No matter how much greatness we pursue, how much we strive for excellence, but God, see, He can give us contentment and final satisfaction because He's an infinite and eternal God. Yeah, I mean, if He were finite, then yes, it would be a different story, right? We'd be back to where we started. If we tried to put our hope in something that was finite, it would never be enough for us. God could never be enough if that were the case. But, and I want you to write this down if you're taking notes, the infinite, eternal God of the universe is enough to satisfy us infinitely and eternally. See, He's the God who loves us and has created us in His image. He's the God who's our refuge and our strength, a rock and a fortress in which we safely dwell. He's the God who's all-powerful, the all-powerful King of the universe, the ruler of all things. But He's also our good Father who cares for us and provides for our every need. He's the God who hears and answers our prayers, the God who makes us into what He wants us to be, the God who entered into time and space to make us right with Himself by dying for us, the God who would die to make us right with Him. Man, and yet He's the God who holds everything together by the word of His power at this very moment. We wouldn't exist if He weren't here in His power holding everything together. That's incredible. He's that God. And when we start to believe all of those things, man, it's going to bring contentment in our lives rather than craving for things that we shouldn't have. It's going to bring joy rather than frustration or irritation. It's going to bring happiness rather than anxiety. See, things like what you worry over or what you get anxious about or what you get frustrated about or irritated with, what you can just, you can't get it off your mind. It's what you think about all the time. You want it so bad, or all of that. See, those things reveal what we covet or what we're idolizing. What is that thing for you that you just can't imagine living without? What is it that makes you so angry that you can just kill somebody? What is it that gets you in this place of coveting or idolatry? I got a good story here, I think, that works well with this. It's maybe an obscure story. Maybe some of you guys have heard, especially those of you who are in our stream of things with the Summit and Mercy Hill. It's the story of Amnon and Tamar in 2 Samuel chapter 13. You can turn there if you'd like to, but it'll be on the screen. I just want to read a couple of verses here that help set up this story for us because it's really the classic example of what it means to covet. I want to start in verse 1, 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1. Here's what it says. Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. Assumed this is a half-sister. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister, his half-sister, Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Now, have you ever been so tormented by wanting something that you make yourself ill because of it? See, that's how Amnon felt about Tamar here. And it's clear that love doesn't mean what God says love means. That's not the kind of love. It was more like an objectifying love. He loved the thought of her. He loved the way that she made him feel. He loved her in an illicit kind of way, right? The way that he would love illicit pleasure or sin. And it's obvious that he wants something from her, right? Because he wanted to do something to her. He didn't want to have something with her. He wanted to do something to her. He sees her as an object of his desire that he can't live without experiencing. He has to taste it. He wants to know. In our life, when we find something like this ourselves, what we try to do is make it sound like it's not idolatry. Try to make it sound like it's not. We paint it in a better picture. David Pallison, who's a biblical counseling pioneer, says that we often give these kind of desires, these cravings, these covetous things in our lives, sanitized names. So we'll call them goals, for example. Or man, we'll just call them dreams. We got these dreams we're shooting for. Or we'll call them needs. We have physical needs or our destiny. It's our fate, or we'll call it our deepest longings or whatever we might call it. But what it really is it's a craving. What it really is it's lust. It's coveting. It's idolatry. That's really what it is here. And you can covet in two different kind of ways. You can covet what you don't have. So you want things like your neighbor's house because it's so much nicer than yours, or like your neighbor's spouse because you envy their marriage relationship, or you just think that their spouse is more attractive than your spouse, or whatever it might be. You can envy your neighbor for their money and their wealth and the things that they have because they're more well off than you and you want all of those things. That's lusting after what you don't have. So that's one way to covet. But then another way to covet is coveting what you already have. Is there something in your life that you worry sick over because you don't want to lose it? Something that you can't imagine living without? Something that if it was taken from you might actually make you question whether or not this life is worth living and it not be God? What is that for you? See, Amnon's kind of doing both of these things here. He's desired his half-sister Tamar sexually in a way that he couldn't and shouldn't have her. All right? He's wanting something that's not his, in other words. But he also kind of has her in one way, right? She's his half-sister. They already have a relationship. He can grow in intimacy with her if that's what he wants, But he's so afraid that he's not going to be able to do to her what he wants to do to her. So he's kind of, in some ways, he's coveted in both of these kind of ways. He's desired intimacy, but it's an illicit intimacy. So what is it for you that would cause you to covet in either one of these kind of ways? It's worth considering as we go through this week. I think you ought to jot this down and consider this. What is your Tamar? What is that for you? What is that thing that you just can't get past, that thing that you can't live without, the thing that you want so bad that it consumes what you think about and how you live your life? Yeah, I'll tell you what, this might take some time because you might be so used to just thinking this way that you don't even recognize it. You might need to invite somebody into your life that you trust that can speak into it and say, hey, what is it that you think that I think about too much that's not God? What is it that you can see in my life? Because I'll tell you what, this thing can grip our hearts so much that we live in total denial of it and we don't even realize it. But let me just give you a few examples of what this could be like for you. I just want to try to help you apply it. As you write this down, these questions, what is it for you? And you think about it this week. Man, maybe it's marriage. That's an easy one. That's the one that we can all talk about here. Is it that you just can't imagine living without your spouse? You can't imagine not being married. Or if you're single, you can't imagine living single for the rest of your life. You feel like you have to have a marriage in order to be whole, in order to be fulfilled and satisfied. Or maybe it's somebody else's marriage. I don't know. Do you ever sit around and really wish that you were married to somebody else? Man, do you fantasize about leaving your marriage or having a secret affair or the premature death of your spouse so that you could remarry and not feel guilty about it? Yeah, that could be coveting for you. Or for a lot of us, it might be money. Man, maybe you constantly feel like you don't have enough. Maybe you worry over the bills that you have every time they come around, every month. You never give generously because of it. You hold things very tightly. It affects your emotions because you want comfort and security. You need that money. Or maybe you covet things that money can buy. So you overspend. You're going into deep, deep credit card debt because, man, you're living a lifestyle that's way beyond what you can afford. Credit card debt's a sure sign that you're looking for other things in your life to make you satisfied and content besides God. Or maybe you covet things that you have. Maybe you covet things like family. Do you constantly feel let down by somebody in your family? Or do you worry sick over family members? Do you try to control them so that you have the power because you want to keep them safe and secure? Everything's got to be just right, or else it throws everything in the family dynamic off. Maybe that's what it is for you. Maybe you covet success in your life, your career, whatever it might be. I know that this is always an ever-present monster for me. In my heart and my mind, I feel like I'm keeping it at bay right now. I feel like I'm trusting God. I'm really digging in and trying to find my value in Him and my hope in Him and my joy in Him. But some days I'll just ask the question. I'll wonder, man, if God doesn't use us to reap some of the harvest here in Roanoke, what are we going to do? Because see, in my mind, that's success. What if He doesn't use us? But man, I constantly have to trust that God knows what He's doing, that He's brought us here for a reason, even in the middle of a pandemic, that He planned this out. I have to remember that God's in control. He defines success. I can't do that. He knows what's going to happen. I don't know. And so I have to trust Him and find my joy and hope in Him and not in my idea of success. For you, it might be success in your field or your career, or as a parent or as what a son or daughter, whatever it might be for you. Maybe you get irritated with others when they get recognition over you, or you talk down about people because you want to knock them off their high horse, or you want accolades and you want the approval of others. You crave that approval. You got to have it. I don't know what it is for you, but I do think that you could jot down some of these if you want, just so that you can consider what it is that you covet. Don't worry, I'm not done yet. I'm going to keep drilling this into you because we all covet something. Maybe one of these helps spark what that is in your life. Just listen to this. What do you worry about most? Sure sign that you're coveting something. You worry and worry and worry about that thing, whatever it might be. Now, what if you failed or lost it? Would it make life almost not worth living for you? Would you consider suicide if you lost it, whatever it might be? What do you use to comfort yourself when things go bad or get difficult to make yourself feel better? Tammy gave me permission to say this, but she said for her it's that Grater's black raspberry chocolate chip ice cream, all right? She needs that to make herself feel better when she had a bad day, okay? I don't know what it might be for you. Maybe it's something serious. Maybe it's an affair. Maybe it's you need, to buy things. You get on Amazon and go on a shopping. I don't know what it is for you. What preoccupies your mind? What do you daydream about and dwell on? What do you think about the most? What makes you feel the most self-worth? What are you most proud of in your life? What do you want to be known for? What do you want people to know as the very first thing that they know about you? What is that? Here's a tough one. What unanswered prayer makes you really question your faith or trust in Jesus? What do you really want out of life? What would really make you happy? What is your hope in the future? These are all good questions that I think that you should ask yourself and dwell on and consider what they are, because guys, we can be so self-deceived in these. In all of these situations and more that I haven't even mentioned, I'm sure, we're desiring things that aren't meant to bear the weight of all of our hope. And it ends up leading to some devastating consequences, either for us or for those around us, or both. And in Amnon and Tamar's case, as we read, it leads to Amnon doing the exact thing Eve did in the garden. He saw, he coveted, he craved, so he took. And man, he overpowered his sister. He ends up violating his sister and raping her. It's like this craving was so powerful that it took over his sense of love and his care and his compassion for his sister that he should have had. So that even when she pleaded with him not to do this, he wouldn't stop. He couldn't. His cravings were controlling him. See, when our desires are out of control, they will control us. Man, when our desires are out of control, they'll control us. What we do flows from what we desire. Now, that doesn't let us off the hook of responsibility, okay? So I hope that you don't feel that way. We're responsible for what we allow into our minds. We're responsible for what we dwell on and what we crave. You know, remember last week? What are you filling your mind with? Are you trusting in God's truth as He's revealed it in the Bible? Or are you trusting in something else? Are you believing the lies of the world and the culture that so twist and distort the truth that these cravings come on because we believe the lies? You know, they're things that aren't God. They can never satisfy like He can, and yet we believe them because we're filling our mind constantly. That's what Amnon did. He listened to the lie that physical pleasure would satisfy him, which led to the lie that his sister wasn't worth protecting, which led to all the lies that he had to do to get her in a vulnerable position so he could violate her, which led to the evil that he then perpetrated against her. See, that's very much how the 8th commandment works too. You shall not steal. This is how this kind of fits into the whole thing. Because the command is to not steal, right? Don't take things that aren't yours. In Amnon's case, what did he do? He took his sister. He took her purity. He took her virginity. It wasn't his to take. This is my attempt to kind of work in the 8th commandment here, but I think it's worth talking about. If you're taking notes, stealing is a result of a covetous heart. Stealing is a result of a covetous heart. We could say that about almost every single one of the 10 commandments, but I think it's very well worth saying here. And of course, that's really true for all the commandments as we go on. It's funny how we think to ourselves things like, oh, I'm not the kind of person who would ever take something. I'm not the kind of person who would ever steal. I'm not the person who would ever lie, right? Oh, I wouldn't cheat anybody. I wouldn't sexually victimize someone or fill in the blank with whatever code of conduct it is that you hold yourself to or you see in the 10 commandments. I'd never do that. I just never could see myself ever doing that. I'm not that kind of person. Until all of a sudden, you find yourself doing it because you want that thing more than you could ever imagine. You have this craving that you just can't stop. And so you'll steal, you'll lie, you'll cheat, you'll victimize, and all the rest so that you can just get that one thing that you want that you don't have, or so that you can protect that one thing so you can keep it for yourself because you crave it so badly. Man, when our heart is out of control, when our desires and our cravings control us, because we believe the lies of the culture, then we almost can't help but take what's not ours at that point. We just give in. We gave in long ago to the idolatry. And in that moment, it's just natural for us to give in and to pursue that thing at whatever cost. That's what happened with Amnon, right? He did a horrible thing. Maybe that something that he never thought that he would ever otherwise do in a million years. He did that one thing because his desires controlled him in that moment. He did the unthinkable. And he would ultimately pay for it with his life. When Tamar's brother, probably her full brother, Absalom, would murder Amnon for it. But then listen to how this little episode ends here. At least it ends for us as we close out this particular passage. Verse 14 says, "But he would not listen to her. Being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, 'Get up, go.'" See, he'd gotten what he'd craved. Yeah? Remember, he was sick with desire, almost ill because of it. But then he became sick of Tamar after he had her the way that he wanted to use her. So he hated her and told her to get out of his life. See, when we finally get what we desperately desire, it's going to disappoint us every time. It's going to leave us bitter, unsatisfied. It's going to leave us angry. It can never satisfy us the way we think it's going to. C.S. Lewis actually points out there are two kinds of unhappy people in life. Those who've realized they'll never get what they desire, so they get bitter and cynical about it. Or those who've gotten what they desire, but it's left them unsatisfied, so they get bitter and cynical about it. You see how that works? Either way, we end up being bitter and cynical because it's not giving us what we want. Your idols will always let you down. Nothing but God can give you lasting contentment. Nothing but God can give you that contentment that you're looking for that will last into eternity. Idols never can. They can never give you what you're looking for. Tim Keller, in a sermon on coveting, he likened it to the one ring that rules them all. Sorry if you don't like Lord of the Rings. You're crazy if that's the case. That's how my wife Tamara is. I'm sorry. I'm not hating on Tamara. She actually gave me permission to use all these today. Okay, so I just wanted. She told me to tell you that just to make sure that you don't see me hating on her. But I thought that she doesn't like Lord of the Rings, but she gets this, and I think it's really important in the Lord of the Rings saga. Sauron's the big overlord. He's the bad guy, and he's put all of his power into this one ring that rules all the rest of the rings that were created. And he's put so much of his power and vitality and self into this ring that when he wears it, it magnifies his power and intensity. He's almost invincible when he has the ring on, and it's everything that he could ever want and desire. But when that ring's off, man, he's nothing without it. Because all of his power and his vitality, his life is wrapped up in that very ring. And so when it's cut off of his finger, that's why he goes away. But he's building the army. He wants the ring back. And yet, when the ring gets destroyed, he's destroyed with it. I don't know if you remember in the movies, when the ring falls down into the volcanic molten lava and it bursts into flames as it goes there on Smeagol's hand. That's when Sauron, the eye, bursts into flames and he's destroyed because his life, his vitality, everything that he wanted in life was wrapped up into that one ring. And so when it gets destroyed, he's destroyed. And that's exactly what idolatry is like. Exactly. We wrap ourselves up into these little things that we want so bad. We put our life there. We put our power there. And man, when we got that thing, we feel good. It's everything that we feel invincible in life when we have that thing. But as soon as we lose it, or it gets destroyed, then man, we lose ourselves or we get destroyed with it. That's exactly what's going on here, because coveting leads to our destruction. Every time. When we desire things that are not God, it leads to destruction. See, there is another kind of coveting the Bible talks about. I want to make a hard shift here. The Bible talks about a different kind of coveting. 1 Peter, we see that the angels long to look into things concerning God's salvation of humanity. In other words, they desire, they crave, they lust even to see into the gospel and to understand its fullness and its complete effects in the world and its salvation for all humankind. The same word for covet is used there in 1 Peter in the Greek. It's the same word. That is the kind of craving that we need to have. It's a craving to see God work and move and to see His kingdom come in the world. It's the only kind of lust that can outdo all of the other lusts that we might have. It's the only kind of craving that's good for our souls. If you're taking notes, you can write down the main point again, just for emphasis. Crave to know Jesus above all else. That's the idea here. You've got to crave to know Jesus above all else. In a sermon on this, Pastor J.D. Greer said, "The Christian life is a paradox. If you crave comfort, you'll find misery. If you crave love, you'll find loneliness. If you crave significance, you'll only find rejection. If you crave control, you'll only find chaos. If you crave reputation, you'll receive humiliation. But if you crave Jesus, not only will you get Him, but along the way you'll find happiness, love, meaning, order, and glory just thrown in. All of those things, if you seek His kingdom, all the rest of that will be added. That's why, and he goes on to say, that's why Jesus said, he who loves his life will lose it. He who loses his life will keep it. So, in other words, he who loves his life, covets it, seeks it, hangs on to it for dear life, has to protect it at all costs, covets it, he'll lose his life. But he who loses his life to hang on to Jesus will keep it instead into eternity. So you don't have to steal or covet or lie or lust or whatever you think you have to do to make yourself happy and satisfied. All you have to do is desire Jesus above all things. And you know what? We can't even do that, can we, on our own? We can't even do that apart from God moving in us in His Holy Spirit, getting into our hearts and our souls. Ephesians 2:8 says this, "For by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not of your own doing." Not even the faith is of your own doing. It's a gift of God. It has to be given to us by God. And if you're not a Christian here today, you need to ask yourself, is He giving you this desire to know Him? Is He calling you to cling to Jesus today, to hold on to Him for dear life? Because the Bible tells us that He wishes that no one should die an eternal death. He wants a relationship with every single person in the world, including you. He wants you. He wants you to know Him. No matter who you are, what you've done, it doesn't matter. What skin color you have, what background you grew up in, what culture you come from, what ethnicity, it doesn't matter. He values you so much that He sent Jesus into the world to live the perfect life for you and to die in your place. See, we deserve punishment for our refusal to follow God's laws. We deserve eternal punishment for rejecting the eternal God. Okay? But instead of punishment, Jesus offers us grace. He offers the great exchange. He's been so generous with us to the point of giving His own life to save us. Man, how could we not respond with giving our very lives back to Him? See, that's the answer to the problem that we have with all of these commandments. We steal, or lie, or commit adultery, or all the rest, because we covet. We covet because we don't believe God's enough. And we see that Jesus has done all of this for us. When we see His generosity toward us and believe in His generosity and put our hope in it and crave it and long for it, desire it, we believe it's been applied to us. God's going to begin a transformation in us that starts now and goes into eternity with Him forever. That's where our craving should be. So that we can pray like Jesus taught us to pray, your kingdom come, and we'll mean it. We really long to see His kingdom come into the world. We believe. That's where all of our hope and joy is. We crave, we desire, we covet to see that. It's the only thing that can truly satisfy us. It's the only thing that can give us joy. It's also the only thing that can give us generous hearts ourselves. If you're taking notes, Jesus' generosity enables us to be generous to others. See, it's His generosity that enables us to give of ourselves and to be generous to others. There's no way I'm going to stop coveting my neighbor's things unless I receive Jesus' generosity. Because that's what gives me the desire to give rather than to take from others. I'm not going to want to give until I see and behold and understand the beauty of how much Jesus has given to me. He's given His very life. And that changes my heart in a way that I can't understand. It's mysterious, but it does. The opposite of coveting is contentment in God. The result of contentment in God is to desire to give because we've been given too. That's why I think the 8th and 10th commandments actually go well together. That's why I put them together here at the end, because obviously the idea of the 8th commandment is that rather than take what's not yours, give what is yours to those who don't have it. The only way that that's possible is to have your desires changed. You can see how all the commandments are so woven together. Lying steals the truth. Adultery steals relational intimacy. Killing steals a very life. See, lying, we saw, goes through it all. Stealing goes through it all. Maybe even some kind of lust, coveting, certainly goes through it all. Man, but trusting Jesus fixes it all. Seeing His sacrifice for me, receiving His generosity, it enables me to show generosity to my neighbors. Then there will be no question. No. Of course I'm not going to harm my neighbor. Of course I'm not going to lie to him. I'm not going to withhold the truth. Of course I'm not going to steal. I'm going to take care of my neighbors. I'll love them and give myself to them in the same way that Jesus has given Himself to me. There's no question there. When I believe what Jesus has done, all we have to do is look to Him and trust that He really is better. Don't let this world blind you. Don't keep pumping the lies into your mind and your heart. Man, see that God is good. See what He's done for you and crave Him. Crave Him. And let me conclude, I think very appropriately, conclude the series, conclude the sermon today. The John Piper quote, okay? It's an appropriate way to end our time together. And he gave this in a sermon in 1997, but it's still very relevant today. He said, we need to ponder the superiority of God as our great reward over all that the world has to offer. If we don't, we'll love the world like everyone else and live like everyone else. So take the things that drive the world and ponder how much better and more abiding God is. Take money or sex or power or popularity. Think about these things. First, think about them in relation to death. Death will take away every one of them. Money, sex, power, and popularity. They're all gone with death. If that's what you live for, you won't get much. And what you get, you lose. But God's treasure is abiding. It lasts. It goes beyond death. It's better than money because God owns all the money and He's our Father. All things are yours and you are Christ's and Christ is God's, 1 Corinthians 3 tells us. It's better than sex Jesus never had sexual relations, and he was the most full and complete human that ever will exist. Sex is a shadow, an image of a greater reality, of a relationship and pleasure that will make sex seem like a yawn. Of course, John Piper would say that. It's great. And then he says the reward of God is better than power. There's no greater human power than to be a child of the Almighty God. It's better than popularity, he says. Fame is a pipe dream if you're only known by human nobodies. But if the greatest beings know you, that is popularity of another kind. The greatest popularity is to be known by God. And so it goes on and on. Everything the world has to offer, God is better and more abiding. There's no comparison. God wins every time. The question is, will you have Him? Will we wake up from the trance of this stupefying world and see and believe and rejoice and love? Let me pray for us. Father, thank you so much for everything that you've done for us in the gospel. It's so freeing to understand that the rules don't hold us down. They really just give us a great pattern to follow after Christ. But the only way that we have the power to follow them is to believe in what Jesus has done for us, to let Him transform our hearts, and to start from there. God, please forgive us where we covet. Please forgive us where we do all of these things that are displeasing to you, and we put these things above you. God, forgive us. Help us. God, I just pray for our church and our launch team right now, that as we've gone through this series in the Ten Commandments, we've done it for a reason. It's so that, God, you get our hearts right. You get us ready, so that, God, as we move into this season now where we're getting ready to launch in a few months, even though it's a pandemic, even though it might not be as grand as what we might think, people won't show up, I don't know, it doesn't matter. God, you have us here to advance your kingdom. And God, I just pray. I pray for our team. They'll get these things deep down into their soul. That they won't covet. They won't desire anything else but to see your kingdom come. God, I just pray that that will bleed over into everything that they do in their lives. I pray, God, that you'll use us to see a harvest for your glory. You define success, no doubt. God, I just pray that you'll save somebody through Redemption Church. God, allow us to see 5 baptisms by Easter, if you will. Allow us to see 100 people join the team by then, if you will. That's all up to you. You may not do those things, and we'll have to be okay with it. But God, maybe you do want to do those things or beyond. God, we'll have to be okay with that too. God, I just pray that you get the glory for it all. And I just pray today that we'll reflect on these things. We'll see where we've gone wrong, what our desires are if they're not on you, and then we'll turn back to Jesus today. And we'll see everything that He's done for us. We'll believe, we'll trust, and we'll live out of that truth in our lives. I pray all this in Jesus' name because He makes it possible. Amen.